The most powerful woman in Europe had her own personal scales, her own dairy herd, her own gymnasium, her own meat press, and a hairdresser earning more than most civil servants. She consumed almost nothing solid for decades. Her lady-in-waiting wrote that without constant intervention, the Empress would have died of starvation. Nobody stopped her. Nobody could, because refusing food was the only power she had left. Elisabeth of Austria is one of the most famous women in European history, and almost everything you know about her comes from a 1955 film trilogy starring Romy Schneider. That version is a fairy tale. The real version is a case study in what happens when an institution grinds down a human being so completely that controlling her own body becomes the last remaining act of defiance. She was not even supposed to be there. In August 1853, Archduchess Sophie of Austria invited her sister Ludovica to bring her 19-year-old daughter Helene to the resort town of Bad Ischl for Emperor Franz Joseph's 23rd birthday. The visit had one purpose. Sophie wanted her son married, and Helene was the candidate. 15-year-old Elisabeth came along as a companion, the younger sister tagging along because someone had to. She was not the plan. Hayman's biography finds no written evidence in the mother's correspondence, confirming a formal betrothal arrangement naming Helene, though the matchmaking purpose of the visit is broadly accepted by historians. What is certain is that Elisabeth was not part of it. Ludovica arrived late because of a headache. Their gala dresses never showed up, so the sisters appeared in black mourning clothes. The accident may have worked in Elizabeth's favour. Dark fabric against that pale Bavarian complexion, light hair, those eyes. Franz Joseph took one look and forgot Helene existed. Sophie wrote in her diary that her son was beaming. She recorded his words with the pride of a mother who had just watched her boy fall in love with the wrong girl. He compared Elizabeth's lips to strawberries and called her exuberant. Helene he described as a little quiet. When Sophie pressed him about the original plan, he told her if he could not have Elisabeth, he would not marry at all. At the birthday cotillion ball on August 18th, Franz Joseph handed his bouquet to Elisabeth instead of Helene. In a court where every gesture was choreographed and every flower arrangement carried political weight, this was a detonation. Hugo von Weckbecker, who had been dancing, reportedly said he thought he had just danced with the future Empress. The engagement was announced the next day and published in the Wiener Zeitung 5 days later. Elisabeth burst into tears and said she loved the Emperor so much, if only he were not the Emperor. She was 15. She meant it. No direct quote from Helene at the time survives. She became more withdrawn. She increased her daily church attendance. Her mother feared she would enter a convent. She eventually married Maximilian Anton of Thurn and Taxis in 1858, which was reportedly the only happy marriage among the 5 Wittelsbach sisters. Decades later, when Helene was dying of stomach cancer in 1890, Elisabeth rushed to her bedside. Marie Valerie's diary records the exchange. Helene greeted her with 2 words, "Old Sisi." Elisabeth replied that they had both had hard puffs in their lives. Helene's answer was the most devastating line in the whole story. "Yes, but we had hearts." The wedding was on April 24th, 1854. Elisabeth travelled down the Danube by steamer, weeping. She was 16. She later wrote that marriage is an absurd arrangement, that one is sold as a 15-year-old child and makes a vow one does not understand and then regrets for 30 years or more, which one can never undo again. She also wrote that she had awakened in a dungeon with chains on her hands. When she arrived in Vienna and embraced her cousins, she was told protocol forbade such displays. This was her introduction to what the Habsburg court actually was. She had grown up in Bavaria skipping lessons to ride horses. She could not speak French, which was the language of European aristocracy. She was wholly unprepared for the machine she had just been fed into. The machine had a name, the Spanisches Hofzeremoniell, Spanish ceremonial protocol, and it governed everything. When the emperor appeared or his name was spoken, courtiers dropped to a deep bow on bended knee called the tief reverens. There were prescribed walking speeds in palace corridors, hierarchical seating at meals based on political alliances, daily dress inspections. A surviving 1856 memo criticised Elisabeth for wearing silver thread instead of gold. She was required to ride side saddle with 12 groom escorts. She needed permission from Franz Joseph's aides to discuss literature, philosophy or current events, because these topics were considered dangerous for female minds. No one could address the Empress uninvited. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu had observed in 1716 that the Austrians displayed passion in nothing but points of ceremony. 140 years later, nothing had changed. The machine also had a face. Archduchess Sophie. She was called the Secret Empress and the only man at court, and she had earned both names. During the previous emperor's ineffectual reign, Sophie had orchestrated his abdication on December 2, 1848, pushed her own husband to renounce his claim, and engineered her 18-year-old son's accession. She was the architect of Franz Joseph's throne. She was not about to hand that architecture over to a 16-year-old Bavarian girl who liked horses. Sophie personally escorted Elizabeth to the bridal chambers on the wedding night and waited in the adjacent room. Her diary entry records the scene with the calm of a woman overseeing a logistics operation. She wrote that she led the young bride to her rooms, left her with her mother, stayed in the small room next to the bedroom until Elizabeth was in bed, then fetched her son and led him to his young wife, whom she saw once more to wish her a good night. The consummation did not occur until the third night. When Elizabeth had her first child, Sophie took the baby. Not metaphorically. She named the girl Sophie Friederike Dorothea Maria Josepha after herself, arranged the christening the same day without telling the mother, and took complete charge. Elizabeth was not allowed to breastfeed. The same pattern repeated with the second daughter, Gisela, born in 1856. The nursery was placed near Sophie's apartments, not Elizabeth's. When Elizabeth managed to move the nursery closer to her own quarters, she did it while Sophie was away from Vienna and did not inform her. Sophie's broader criticisms went beyond nursery logistics. She viewed the birth of daughters as a failure on Elizabeth's part. She objected to Elizabeth's love of Hungary, which she considered a political betrayal. She thought Elizabeth too immature and unequal to the task of raising children. These were not private opinions, they shaped court policy. Franz Joseph, still guided by his mother well into his reign, did not challenge them. Franz Joseph sided with his mother on the children. No matter how long Elizabeth begged him to intervene, he would not. Elizabeth described herself as a bird with clipped wings, permitted to admire her chicks, but never to hold them. She did not gain control of a child's upbringing until Marie Valerie was born in 1868, 14 years into the marriage. Then the first child died. On May 4, 1857, the imperial couple arrived in Buda for their first tour of Hungary, and Elizabeth had insisted on bringing both daughters. Baby Sophie had shown symptoms before departure, fever and diarrhea, which doctors attributed to teething. Both children fell ill. Gisela recovered. While the parents were visiting Debrecen, a telegram arrived. Elizabeth rushed back and stayed at her child's side for 11 hours. Sophie died on May 29, 1857, at 9:15 p.m., likely of typhus. Nobody told Elizabeth directly that it was her fault. They did not need to. The blame was ambient, institutional. Everyone made her feel she had caused her daughter's death. Franz Joseph telegraphed his mother that their little one was an angel in heaven. 6 months later, he wrote that poor Sisi was much affected by all the memories and cried a great deal. Elizabeth visited the Capuchin crypt daily through the summer of 1857. She wore a bracelet with her dead daughter's likeness for the rest of her life. She refused to eat for days. It would not be the last time. Here is what you need to understand about Elizabeth's relationship with food, because it was not vanity and it was not discipline. Walter van der Eycken at the Catholic University of Leuven produced the definitive academic analysis across 3 peer-reviewed publications in the 1990s. His diagnostic conclusion was that Elizabeth exhibited symptoms consistent with anorexia nervosa, sustained over decades. Persistent fear of weight gain, systematic food restriction, compulsive exercise, and what he called psychopathological changes specific to the disorder. Van der Eycken connected her political withdrawal directly to her eating pathology. She restricted social obligations in tandem with restricting her body. The two were the same mechanism. She had herself weighed daily, sometimes multiple times. Her personal scales survive at the Hofburg and are displayed in the Sisi Museum. Her hairdresser measured her waist, wrists and ankles every morning. A court doctor documented edema of hunger with pronounced ankle swelling. Staff noted acetone breath, which is a starvation marker. The Prince of Hesse described her proportions as almost inhumanly slender. The liquid diets took multiple forms, milk days where she consumed nothing else. orange days, meat juice, which was freshly pressed extract of raw chicken, partridge, venison and beef forced through a mechanical press, raw egg whites beaten with salt, beef broth, black coffee, raw milk from dairy herds she kept at Schönbrunn and in the Leinzer Tiergarten, and violet ice cream from the Viennese confectioner de Mel. Count Louis von Rechberg complained in 1860 that the Empress had the deepest aversion to any kind of nourishment, that she no longer ate anything at all. He also noted the entire imperial meal, 4 courses, 4 desserts and coffee, lasted no more than 25 minutes. Her mother, writing from Corfu during a period of relative calm, noted Elizabeth's improved appetite, that she ate a lot of meat, drank beer, was cheerful, coughed little. The pattern reversed when she was emotionally stable. When the pressure returned, the eating collapsed again. Marie Festetics, her lady-in-waiting who served from 1870 onward, wrote in her diary that Elizabeth was so obsessed with the idea she was getting stout, and that Festetics believed if she did not insist so often, Elizabeth would long since have died of starvation. The exercise was relentless. She walked 4 to 5 hours daily in all weather, with capacity for 9 to 10 hours at full speed. The pace was not leisurely. Her ladies-in-waiting, who were required to accompany her, protested. Their protests changed nothing. They rotated in shifts because no single attendant could keep up. Staff recalled that Her Majesty always looked so exhausted. The exhaustion did not slow her down. It was the point. She had gymnasium equipment installed at every residence she used. The Hofburg had wall bars, a high bar, and rings mounted in the doorframe, all 3 of which survive in the museum. Schönbrunn had rings and a horizontal bar. Godolo in Hungary had a riding hall. When she rented Combermere Abbey in Cheshire, England, in 1881, she had a gymnasium assembled for days when hunting was impossible. She arrived with 80 staff, 25 grooms, 25 horses and her hairdresser. At Combermere, a completely new staircase was built connecting her sitting room directly to the kitchens. The purpose was to allow her to eat away from observers. This is one of the clearest behavioural markers in the historical record. Secret eating infrastructure built into a rented English country house. Her Greek reader Konstantin Christomanos described her exercising on New Year's Day 1892, hanging on the ropes in her gymnasium. He wrote that she made a fantastic impression, like a creature somewhere between snake and bird. His memoir, published in 1899 as Tagebuchblätter, was banned by the Viennese court. She was sewn into her clothes, literally, to bypass waistbands and wrinkles, to keep the surface completely smooth. She never wore petticoats or any underlinens because they added bulk. Her corsets were rigid, solid front made of leather in Paris, described as being like those of Parisian courtesans, designed to withstand the stress of extreme lacing. The process sometimes took an hour. She went through them in weeks because even leather could not hold. The hair was its own obsession. Fanny Angera, who later married and became Pfeiffarlich, served as imperial hairdresser for 2,000 florins annually, a university professor's salary. She wore all white, including white gloves, while working. Daily styling took approximately 3 hours. Washing happened every 3 weeks using cognac and egg yolk and consumed an entire day. Every hair that fell during brushing was collected, counted and reported. Fanny developed a workaround. Adhesive strips hidden inside her apron to trap stray hairs so Elizabeth would not see them and become distressed. The hair reached to her heels and was so heavy it gave her regular headaches. She called herself a slave to her hair. She said it felt like a foreign body on her head. Her Greek reader once told her she wore her hair like a crown instead of the crown, and she replied that any other crown is more easily laid aside. At night she slept wearing a leather mask lined with raw slices of veal or crushed strawberries pressed against her skin. She applied pure honey with crushed strawberries, took warm olive oil baths, and slept with a cold wet towel wrapped around her midsection. The daily preparation total, hair and corset and dressing and beauty treatments, approached 4 hours. She used these hours as legitimate cover for avoiding court obligations. By 1867, her annual medical absences totaled 147 days. In 1878, she unilaterally abolished the nix, the mandatory curtsy ceremony that had been required for 400 years. To understand why none of this surprised her family, you need to understand the Wittelsbachs. Elizabeth's father was Duke Maximilian Joseph in Bavaria, called Zither Maxel for his obsessive zither playing. He built a circus ring at his residence and performed as a clown. He organised drinking clubs, scattered illegitimate children, and once had his servants yodel while he climbed the Great Pyramid of Giza. He told Elizabeth that if they had not been princely born, they could have performed in a circus. No formal diagnosis of mental illness exists. He reads as a genuine bohemian eccentric, but the line between eccentricity and pathology in this family was always thin. Her first cousin Ludwig II of Bavaria called himself the Eagle. Elizabeth was the Dove. They met regularly on Rose Island in Lake Starnberg. In June 1886, Dr. Bernhard von Gudden and 3 other psychiatrists diagnosed Ludwig with paranoia without ever examining him in person. A 2020 peer-reviewed study in the European Archives of Psychiatry and Clinical Neuroscience concluded that while the diagnosis was defensible by 1886 standards, Ludwig's homosexuality was probably an important reason for his removal from office, and the psychiatric report deliberately omitted those allegations to protect the king. Ludwig's letters until his final day were reasonable, well-argued and impeccable in style. On June 13, 1886, Ludwig and Dr. von Gudden were found dead in Lake Starnberg. Official ruling: suicide by drowning. Post-mortem evidence was inconclusive, with indications of a struggle. Elizabeth's reaction cut through the official narrative. She said the king was not mad, that he was just an eccentric living in a world of dreams, and that they might have treated him more gently, and perhaps spared him so terrible an end. Ludwig's younger brother Otto had been confined since 1873. Doctors formally documented mental illness in January 1872, what modern medicine would call paranoid schizophrenia, possibly neurosyphilis. He technically became King of Bavaria after Ludwig's death but never ruled. Then there was Princess Alexandra of Bavaria, who developed the delusion she had swallowed a grand piano made of glass. She crept through palace halls and turned sideways through doorways, terrified of shattering it. She also exhibited obsessive cleanliness and wore exclusively white. Duke Maximilian married Princess Ludovica of Bavaria, who was his father's cousin. Elizabeth then married her own first cousin, Franz Joseph. The family tree folds back on itself through repeated Bavarian royal intermarriage. No formal inbreeding coefficient study comparable to the one done on the Spanish Habsburgs has been published for the Wittelsbachs, but the pedigree speaks for itself. Elizabeth told companions that in Shakespeare the madmen are the only sensible ones. The German ambassador reported she abandoned herself to incessant brooding, reproached herself, and attributed to the inherited Wittelsbach blood the mental confusion of her poor son. That poor son was Crown Prince Rudolf. Rudolf inherited Wittelsbach melancholy through his mother and Habsburg pressure through his father. He developed depression, alcoholism, and morphine addiction. He contracted gonorrhea, possibly syphilis. On January 30th, 1889, he shot his 17-year-old mistress Marie Valerie at the Mayerling hunting lodge, then sat with her body for several hours before shooting himself. The cover-up was instantaneous. The court issued a fraudulent medical certificate declaring Rudolf not responsible for his actions to secure a Catholic burial. Marie Valerie received a sham post-mortem falsely ruling suicide. Her body was dressed, propped upright in a carriage, with a stick up her dress to prevent her from toppling, and secretly buried at Heiligenkreuz Abbey. When Elizabeth was told Rudolf was very sick with no hope of recovery, Marie Valerie immediately asked if he had killed himself. Elizabeth resisted. She said no, she would not believe that. It was so certain that the girl had poisoned him. She kissed Rudolf's corpse on the mouth when it arrived at 2 a.m. Her faith collapsed. She said that Rudolf's bullet had killed her faith. Marie Valerie recorded that her mother would probably never again be as she was, that she envied Rudolf his death, and day and night longed for her own. She told Marie Valerie it was a torment to be alive and indicated she wanted to kill herself. The one relationship that might have offered something different was Captain William George Bay Middleton, who served as her hunting pilot in England and Ireland from approximately 1876 to 1882. He guided her across the most dangerous country in British fox hunting, and she was good enough to keep up, which in Leicestershire in the late 1870s meant clearing fences that broke other riders' necks. Their final known meeting was March 20th, 1888 at Godollow. He married Charlotte Baird on October 25th, 1882. No evidence of improper behaviour has ever been found. His wife destroyed all of Elizabeth's letters to him after his death. He died on April 9th, 1892, breaking his neck in a steeplechase fall at Kineton. The destruction of the correspondence makes any definitive assessment impossible, and that is probably the point. This is the context in which Elisabeth engineered the Catherine-Schratt arrangement. Franz Joseph had first seen Schratt perform in 1873. Closer contact began around 1883 or 1884. By 1886, the relationship was formalised. Their correspondence would span 30 years, from 1886 until Franz Joseph's death in 1916. Elisabeth was the architect of all of it. She summoned Schratt to a private audience and brokered the agreement herself. She commissioned court painter Heinrich von Angeli to paint Schratt's portrait as a gift to Franz Joseph. She arranged regular visits to the portrait sittings as cover for meetings. She sent Schratt an emerald ring with a letter using double entendre, thanking her for her sacrifice, and she coined the term Die Freundin, the lady friend. Elisabeth felt remorse that her constant absence deprived her husband of contact with women. The arrangement was a calculated trade. She exchanged marital duties for freedom of movement. Most people who hear this story find it bizarre. It makes perfect sense if you understand that Elisabeth had long stopped thinking of her marriage as a relationship and started thinking of it as a system of permissions and obligations that could be negotiated like a contract. With that freedom, she became a ghost. She travelled compulsively across Europe, the Mediterranean, North Africa, never staying long. Marie Valerie, born in Budapest, was called the Hungarian child and was the only child Elisabeth raised personally. She had neglected Gisela. She had neglected Rudolf. Rudolf resented it, and he had reason to. The mother who had been denied her first children chose, when she finally had the power, to lavish attention on one child and withdraw from the others. The cruelty she suffered did not make her incapable of inflicting it. She studied both modern and ancient Greek during her daily hairdressing sessions, tutored by Christomanos. Her passion for Greek antiquity led her to build the Achillean Palace on Corfu between 1890 and 1891, which she described as wanting to be a palace worthy of Achilles, who despised all mortals and did not fear even the gods. She had herself lashed to ship masts during storms, deliberately imitating Odysseus. She named one of her horses Nihilist, which was a provocative political statement for an empress. In 1888, at age 51, she walked into a Greek harbour cafe and got an anchor tattooed on her left shoulder. Franz Joseph called it a dreadful surprise. She wrote poetry obsessively in the style of Heinrich Heine, whom she considered her spiritual master despite never meeting him. He died in 1856. She claimed his ghost dictated verses to her at night. In 1886, she wrote that she had loved and lived but never achieved what she strove for. In 1887, she wrote that she fled from the world and its pleasures. In her cycle, Titania, the protagonist shall not go among people, in this world where no one understands her. These are not the verses of a woman performing sadness. They are the verses of a woman recording it. In 1890, she sealed her poems in a cassette, deposited them with the Swiss Confederation under a 60-year blocking period, and specified that proceeds should benefit political prisoners and their dependents in need of help. They were first published in 1984. The proceeds now go to UNHCR. In the Austrian state archives, the court recipe books, the Hofrezept-Bücher, record cocaine administered to Elisabeth intravenously as a treatment for depression, following Sigmund Freud's 1884 recommendation of cocaine as a miracle cure. A Los Angeles Times dispatch from September 24, 1890, reported she smoked from 30 to 40 Turkish and Russian cigarettes a day, plus Italian cigars after dinner. For a woman of her station, in 1890, this was scandalous. By the summer of 1898, she had narrowed to almost nothing. Her own words from July, 2 months before she died: she was in bad humour and sad, the family could be glad they were away from her, and she had a sense she would not rally again. She believed herself nothing but a burden on the emperor and the country, a miserable, languishing creature who thought Franz Joseph should remarry. When Count Andrassy died on February 18, 1890, she said her last and only friend was dead. On September 10, 1898, she was travelling incognito as the Countess of Hohenheim, staying at the Hotel Beau-Rivage in Geneva on the Quai du Mont Blanc. Her sole companion was Countess Irma Stare, her last lady-in-waiting. Shortly before 1:30 p.m, the two women left the hotel walking toward the steamship SS Geneve. Luigi Lucchesi was waiting on the promenade. Born Louis Lucchesi in Paris on April 22, 1873. Father unknown. His mother, Luigia Lucchini, abandoned him to a foundling hospital. He was transferred to Italy in August 1874 and moved between orphanages and foster families for years. He worked as a child labourer from age 10, 3 years in the Royal Italian Army from 1893 to 1896, including the First Italo-Ethiopian War. After discharge, he drifted to Lausanne and absorbed anarchist ideology, becoming a proponent of propaganda of the deed, the doctrine that assassinating a public figure constituted a political argument. His original target was Prince Henri Philippe d'Orléans, the Orleanist claimant to the French throne, who had left Geneva earlier than expected. Lucchesi lost track of him. Then he read in a Geneva newspaper that the Countess of Hohenems was actually the Empress of Austria. He switched targets. He later said he was an anarchist who came to Geneva with the intention of killing any sovereign as an example for others. He also said it was because he was poor, because he loved the workers, and because he desired to see the death of the rich. His weapon was a sharpened triangular industrial needle file with a wooden handle. Total length approximately 10 centimetres, shaft 2 centimetres wide. He used a file because he could not afford a stiletto or a revolver. He lunged and struck her once below the left breast. The attack took seconds. No struggle, no cry. The force knocked her to the ground, but she stood up immediately. She told Stare it was nothing, that the man had just knocked against her, that he must have been after her watch. She thanked the passers-by who helped. She walked approximately 100 yards and boarded the SS Geneve. She did not know she had been stabbed. Shortly after boarding, she collapsed unconscious on deck. Stare thought it was a fainting spell. When she loosened Elizabeth's bodice, she noticed a small reddish-brown blood stain on the chemise. The ship turned back. The wound was V-shaped and barely visible, located 11 centimetres below the left clavicle and 11 centimetres lateral to the sternum, approximately 4 centimetres above the nipple. The file had entered the third intercostal space, fractured the fourth rib across its entire thickness, perforated the left lung with a 1 centimetre entry and 8 mm exit, and created triangular wounds on both the anterior and posterior walls of the left ventricle. Total penetration depth 85 mm. The cause of death was pericardial tamponade. Blood leaked slowly from the double perforation into the pericardial sac. The sharp, clean wound edges permitted only small spurts with each heartbeat. Pressure in the pericardium increased progressively until it stopped the heart from filling. The original 1898 autopsy noted death was caused by a progressive and slow blood leak, sufficient to compress the heart and suspend its functions. A 2024 reassessment in Wiener Medizinische Wochenschrift argued the corset could not have influenced the fatal mechanism, because the critical bleeding was internal, heart into pericardium, not external. The sharp wound edges, not the corset, explain the slow bleed rate. Elizabeth briefly regained consciousness. She whispered to Stare, "What actually did happen to me?" She did not regain consciousness again. She was carried back to the Hotel Beau-Rivage on an improvised stretcher. Pronounced dead at approximately 2:10 p.m, roughly 40 to 60 minutes after the attack. The autopsy was performed the next day at 2:30 p.m. and lasted approximately 50 minutes. 3 physicians, Hippolyte Jean Gosse, Auguste Reverdin, and Louis Megavond, all from the University or Faculty of Medicine in Geneva, requested by investigating Judge Léché. Lucchesi was tried November 10, 1898, and sentenced to life imprisonment, because Geneva had abolished capital punishment. He was furious. He wanted execution. He wanted to be a political martyr. He demanded extradition to Italy and was denied. He was found hanged by his belt in his cell on October 19, 1910. His head was preserved in formaldehyde, transferred to Vienna in 1986, displayed at the Narrenturm Pathological Museum until 2000, then interred at Vienna's Zentralfriedhof. His prison memoir was published posthumously in 1998 under the title I Regret Nothing. Franz Joseph was told by Count Eduard Graf von Paar. He froze, slumped into his armchair and said he would be spared nothing on this earth. Later he said nobody knew how much they had loved each other. Marie Valerie wrote that it happened just as her mother had always wished, quickly, painlessly, without medical consultations. The funeral train arrived in Vienna on September 15th. The funeral was 2 days later. Streets were covered with sand to muffle hoofbeats and carriage wheels. The coffin, draped in black velvet, was escorted to the Kapuzinergruft, the imperial crypt at the Capuchin church. Approximately 82 sovereigns and dignitaries attended. Kaiser Wilhelm II was present. Franz Joseph broke down in tears at the crypt. In the 1990s, a German pharmaceutical company coined the term Sisi Syndrome to describe atypical depression, characterized by hyperactivity masking deep melancholy, the sufferer appearing functional and restless rather than withdrawn. It is named for a woman who walked 10 hours a day, built gymnasiums in rented country houses, got tattooed at 51, had herself tied to ship masts in storms, and consumed almost nothing solid for decades. She sealed her real thoughts in a Swiss vault with a 60-year lock. The poems went to political prisoners, the proceeds now go to refugees, and the scales are in a museum. The rings and wall bars are behind glass. The file that killed her is on display at the Hofburg. And her last words were a question she never got answered.